Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we are going to be talking about two brand new releases, two brand new records. We are going to be talking about the newest album from indie rock sensation Ratboys. We are going to be talking about their new record, Singin' to an Empty Chair, as well as the long anticipated drop of J. Cole, Jermaine Cole's The Fall Off. So now, let's move in to this day and talk about Ratboys, indie rock sensation. Dan, I'm immediately going to turn it to you because I remember a couple of weeks ago you mentioned that the previous Ratboys album, The Window, a record that we reviewed very favorably on this show that I absolutely loved, is one of your favorite rock albums of the decade so far. So please tell me, what were you looking for from this new Ratboys album, and what did we get? Because I think if I can speak for the both of us just in the preliminary phase of this, I think this is a very special album.
So the thing about Ratboys is that they're kind of one of the indie rock darlings of this decade, certainly. The third album, Printer's Devil from 2020, really started getting them at the forefront of the indie rock conversation. Happy Birthday, Ratboy was a similar kind of success, but not as notorious as Printer's Devil. Didn't get as much acclaim. But The Window felt like a moment where Ratboys were really starting to come forward as a band to watch in the indie rock space. An album so impactful that Mike the Snare did a whole Discog dive on them. Writing process and video process that he usually saves for like historically defining
Prince,
artists.
Michael Jackson, Madonna, like that remains to be one of the coolest things I think a YouTuber has ever done, because there's no chance that that video did not at least earn Ratboys a sizable chunk of new fans.
But I was on the ground when The Window came out because the lead singer, Julius Steiner, is Louisville native. Ratboys are a Chicago band. So
I did
I
not know
listened to the
that.
Yeah, I
Really?
listened to the album when it dropped. I saw them at Zanzibar when they were promoting the album. It was the first stop on the tour. It was a really, really special show. But The Window, yes, is my favorite rock album of the decade so far. And I love Ratboys' commitment to this very garagey, straightforward rock sound with more elevated, more unconventional approaches to song structure. And it's this hybridization of kind of simple approaches to the sound of the music itself with Julia's very Paul McCartney inspired lyricism and much more late era Beatles, and especially Paul's contributions to the Beatles efforts in her lyricism, makes Ratboys a very special band. And The Window felt like a very special post-pandemic reckoning of an album. I mean, the title and the title track were all about watching an older loved one pass away from COVID through the window of the hospital room that they're in. And the window
Rough.
on that record, yeah, rough song. But the window being this kind of flexible concept that drove the rest of the album was incredible. And so when I heard that they were coming out with a new album, Singing to an Empty Chair, I didn't really know what to expect, especially since The Window felt like such a definitive statement. It's kind of the same way that I felt about the last Big Thief album, where after Dragon New Warm Mountain,
Where
you
do you
kind of
go?
have to wonder, yeah, what the stakes are going to be for an album that big, not just in its own conceit, but an album that ends up being big for that band and for the band's reputation. Where do you go after that? And obviously for Big Thief, it was to strip it back and make something that feels more spontaneous. And it was an album that came to life in the very long tour that they did to promote Dragon New Warm Mountain. But Singing to an Empty Chair feels similarly stripped back and a little bit more reserved than The Window does, but is nonetheless a great companion to The Window. Because where The Window is about losing someone, Singing to an Empty Chair is an album. Calling it a breakup album feels a little bit oversimplifying.
It's like a concept album about a breakup.
Yeah, it's an album about the different kinds of distances that you can feel and the kind of stop gaps that you can have in these interpersonal relationships with someone that's very important to you. So many of these songs are about being unable to communicate or trying very, very hard to communicate something extremely specific, or ruminating on this feeling of being lost and looking for signs out in the world that ultimately lead you back to the conflict that you had kind of wandered away from. Really, the thing that kept me coming back to Singing to an Empty Chair is just how fucking good this mix is
Oh,
and
fuck, dude.
how great Julia sounds on this record. And it starts right from the jump. Like Open Up is just as impressive as anything on the window. And I feel like that
Yes.
largely, as far as the production and the mystery, the mixing and the mastering of this record is concerned, this is on par with the window.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite get there in terms of the song conceits and Julia's songwriting. Don't get me wrong, all of it is great, but it doesn't have as many of those complete knock you off your feet standout moments as The Window maybe does.
Mm.
But I will argue that Sing Into an Empty Chair is more thematically consistent, and the songs do a better job of bridging the ideas that the whole album is kind of based around. Whereas, yeah, the window concept is very flexible. The
Yeah.
empty chair is not. And this
Mhm.
album explores what that empty chair means in a myriad of ways with great grooves, great harmonies, great melodies, great song construction. And so I want to get into the weeds of some of these songs, but if you want my general summary of how I feel about this record, it's a great follow-up to The Window that is more focused, that has just as compelling songs and performances and song structures to find here, but isn't as immediately like knock your socks off as a moment like Black Earth, Wisconsin is
Yep.
off of The Window. We don't have a moment like that here necessarily. We have one that comes close in the 8.5 minute just want you to know the truth. This is that album's version of that by continuing to be more reserved in comparison than Black Earth, Wisconsin is, but still having this moment of a kind of emotional climax where, and just want you to know the truth. I think we can start there because it is the kind of emotional climax of the record. So let's talk about this one in specific. What did you feel about this big, long track?
It really has to do with the structure of this because I think you're right. The overall vibe I get from this album really is that all of these songs really just make the most sense as a part of a greater narrative, whereas The Window was more preoccupied with kind of piecemeal assembling what its concept and themes were, just like a typical album does. You don't really see a rock band be as ambitious as Ratboys are on either of these albums these days. Like that's the thing that I like about them the most is that they aren't quite on the level of Big Thief's genre like versatility, but at the same time, in the lane that they stick to, they feel like they go down a more adventurous highway, so to speak. So when you get to this point on the album, this is an album of thirds to me, in that I feel like the first third of it is Open Up through Anywhere. Then we kind of have the middle, sort of more functional part of the record, which is Penny in the Lake through Just Want You to Know the Truth. And at this point, we've had a couple of songs that feel a bit more transient. We see the figures within this album, notably the main character that is being sung about and their romantic partner who is a bit distant from them. They seem to be drifting apart in the middle of this record. There are songs that are talking about the state of the world right now and how easy it is to get swept up in everything, like on songs like The World So Madly. And so when you get to this point, it feels like a zenith has been crossed for the main character of this album, is that once they've pulled away from the kind of myopia of being involved with this other person and trying to give them grace and trying to, I mean, allow them to open up, like on the first track. And you get to this point, and it's where the main character realizes it's not going to work out. They're in denial. They haven't quite reached the point where they're ready to leave this person, but they understand that it's going to happen. And so this song is like an airing of not, it's like the opposite of an airing of grievances. It's trying to let someone who you know you're going to close off in the future the most emotionally honest feelings about that person that you wanted to give them. Like you go back in your life and you think about old relationships that you were in, and you think about all of the unanswered questions or feelings or things that you left up in the air with this person. And this is the opportunity that this is taking in order to let those things be known to that person. But the ultimate tragedy of the song is that they'll never hear it because they're gone by now. And so this is really less of a culminating moment like you would expect a big song like this to be, and more paving the way for what the resolution of the rest of the album is.
Yeah, and then we move into this kind of third act where what's right for the first time, the protagonist of the album is kind of doing this process of self-reflection and having this dialogue with their subconscious, and they're uncertain about, as the title implies, they're uncertain about the right way to move forward with their life now that they've kind of emotionally closed themselves off from regrets and, skeletons in the closet and uncertainties about this relationship that they were in. Now it pivots to, well, what do I do next? Where do I have to go from here? Now that I'm not staring and singing at the empty chair, where do we go from here? And you go through that dialogue in What's Right, but then you get to Burn It Down, which I initially did not know what to make of. It felt like a strange third act turn. But really, with the conceit of this album, I think it's a perfect move.
Oh,
Going
yes.
into being now certain and so quietly assured that the energy that you were giving this person that you've managed to kind of close off and give closure to can now be put forward into this new effort, whether that's, I mean, genuine revolution, as it's alluded to in the song multiple times, or
Mhm.
like whatever it may be that you need to clear a path out of, whether that's the relationship or whether that's like the systems that are keeping everybody down. As the narrator describes, seeing this person who seems to have always been driven to tear these systems down and clear the path forward. And the narrator gains this kind of not just solidarity, but confidence that they can follow the path and contribute to the path forward. And then I just love the closer on this record, At Peace at the 100 Acre Wood,
Oh,
which uses
yes,
the setting of the Winnie the Pooh short stories and tales to create this kind of image of sanctuary,
I
where
do.
even though there's still work to do, there's a place to go to find rest and find peace. And that clearly is something that the protagonist didn't always have, which is what leads to, begging the people around you to give you more, to open up, to give you forgiveness, to understand where you're coming from. But once you get past needing all these things from other people, the speaker kind of figures out how to make something for themselves, by themselves, that lets them contribute to something better, both for their life and the world around them. And that leads to Sing into an Empty Chair being a really interesting concept record about being on the other side of this slowly crumbling relationship where, like, no big scandal really occurs, but there's just enough weight that eventually things just kind of start to chip away at themselves and the foundation isn't as strong as it used to be, and eventually you have to step away before you get crushed by what is coming if you don't move. And that's what so much of this album is about. And I love that sentiment. I like this as a direction for Ratboys to go in. I think it's a great artistic statement about their artistry, as well as, maybe this is something that's going on in Julia's interpersonal life. Maybe it isn't. But I love the narrative conceit and I love what it does for the band. And I've loved getting more in the weeds of the narrative of this album, listening to it this week. And so it's really begun to resonate with me. I really, really love this record.
I started out listening to this, and at first, the middle of the album, it didn't lose me, but the songwriting does take such a distinct turn because those first 3 to 4 songs are so focused on this album's concept and this person. I mean, the idea, the empty chair in question is what this section of the album is about. And then it kind of blooms outward after that. And that kind of caught me off guard. But revisiting it, going back to it, and discovering that it was way more of a piece with itself than I initially thought that it was, led me to have kind of a continued appreciation for what they're doing on here, to the point where it's not by a considerable distance at all for me. But if you asked me which of the two Rat Boys albums I've listened to and loved that I prefer, I think I might inch closer to this one. There is something a bit more cathartic about the album structure, about the flow to everything. Again, it doesn't have those standout moments like Black Earth, Wisconsin, but at the same time, I think that conceptual framework can account for strengths that it might otherwise lack, because the songwriting here is just so perfect. It has this wry wit, just sort of like really allows the details to inform everything, even when the song itself feels kind of general, like on a song like Penny in the Lake. It's a song that has a very strange metaphor, and you gotta really get in the weeds to see how it actually relates back to the main theme. But then you're like, oh, the penny in the lake that they are mistaking for is the other person. And once you kind of unravel everything, I began to just really fall head over heels in love with this album and its many, many details. Because instrumentally, this thing is just fucking excellent. Like, my favorite song on here is probably Light Night Mountains, All That, which, like, what is happening on the drums on this song? They are fucking going off on this shit, and I love it. It is the kind of versatility that you see from bands like Wednesday, for instance, and they're really kind of leaning into that garagey, weighty hitting. Like you kind of compared this to, or just Ratboys in general, to Paul McCartney. And the moment you said that, I was like, oh my God, I completely get it now. It's Ram. I'm thinking of Ram when I'm thinking about why I love this album for the same exact reasons and the same kind of the clashing tenors of the vocals and the production and just the general vocal presence as a whole is very soft and very gentle, even when the words themselves can be particularly acidic. And man, some of these songs, they really hit. Like again, Open Up is just this wonderful little examination of what it's like trying to reach someone who's just slightly emotionally unavailable. Somebody who is like, you care about them and they care about you, but not enough to be that fully honest version of themselves that you want them to be. And Know You Then is a really great way of trying to unpack the baggage of this person and how, it kind of feels like this song conceit of talking about all of these problems that happened to this person a long time ago and how they couldn't help them is kind of like it's sort of a slightly venomous take on just being like, I didn't do those things to you. I couldn't help you then. Don't take your shit out on me because I wasn't there to help you. And that's a really complicated sentiment. And you still have songs like Anywhere, which really paint this portrait of this sort of idyllic and very spacious and open sort of traveling, just being with someone, the joy of taking refuge in someone else and being someone's shadow, as they put it in the lyrics. And there's one thing about this that you mentioned, and it kind of, I had a bit of a revelation a couple of minutes ago when you were talking about it, because Jen, are you at all familiar with The Hotelier?
No.
Okay. Longtime fans will know that The Hotelier is one of this channel's favorite bands, one of the first discography breakdowns we ever did, and Christian Holden is just one of the coolest people in indie music, and Home Like No Place Is There, one of my favorite albums of all time. And on that album, there is a song called Housebroken, probably the most famous Hotelier song at this point, which is about a dog describing his relationship with the family that owns him. And it's a shitty, abusive relationship that it sucks to listen to. It's a very, very emotional song. And at the like, I don't know if it was revealed at the time, but like years later, Christian Holden was just like, this song is very much about, being in emotionally abusive relationships and being, and also what it is about blanketly, housebroken, dog, but it is also about the police state. It is also about the political, in that you are the dog in this song, and the master that is conveniently referred to is the state. And when I think about songs like Strange Love or This World So Madly or Burn It Down, we have some lyrical allusions to some greater ideas here that maybe the relationship on this album is a little bit more broad than we might initially think, because it is definitely a person, but is it also the world around you? Is it specific bodies of government that are keeping you down? I feel like that's a valid read on some of the stuff that's going on here because this writing is, in fact, just so thoughtful. But the writing doesn't mean much if the music behind it isn't compelling, and the music behind this is deeply, deeply compelling. It just has more energy than most indie rock albums that kind of sound like this. And its buoyancy is just, it's so much fun. It's a 50-minute album and it barely feels half its length. I really, really, really grew to love this album. In fact, I would say this is the best album I've heard all year so far.
I think the best way I could describe Rat Boys is that they are the smartest musicians that you know who just want to keep playing music in the garage. Like
Yes.
they don't want to, the garage aesthetic is not something that has to be outgrown, and they
No.
don't want to outgrow it.
It can be
Um,
expanded. And I would argue that they are expanding it. I mean, what is Black Earth, Wisconsin, if not a testament to the fact that you can take garage rock so much further than it is?
Yeah, exactly. And this album is just another example of how this band brings a testament to that, of like just this pure cut guitar, drum, bass, rhythm guitar approach. Still has so much versatility to it when you're willing to construct something with just a couple extra layers of complexity to it than maybe you normally would. And I think you're right as well in that The Window has a lot of like song to song, big swings and big moves.
Mhm.
But I think this album more so proves that you can make a more challenging and thought-provoking garage rock album as a whole with a more holistic concept to it. When again, you think about how to put just a couple more layers of complexity on top of the basic framework. And these are guys that have been dedicated to doing that ever since that they've started. And I love seeing that vision. It's guys who make entire albums out of Shoegaze by Alabama Shakes. Is one of
Yeah.
my like favorite Alabama Shakes songs, and every Rat Boys album sounds like an hour-long version of Shoegaze by the Alabama Shakes, and I love it.
Absolutely. Two thumbs way, way, way up. Indie rock is alive and well, man.
Yes, absolutely. Much love to Rat Boys once again.
Much, much love. If you have not checked them out, please consider this an enthusiastic endorsement that you need to change that. So, the fall off is here. This is going to be the biggest album that's going to be released this year for a good while, I would wager. Like ASAP Rocky sort of felt like like I was just sort of surprised that anybody was dropping an album that big this early on in the year. And then, like we talked about the rollout for this beginning recently, I didn't know that the album was coming out that soon. I had no clue. If there was a release date that followed after the Birthday Blizzard mixtape, I completely missed it. But J. Cole is a guy who we have like never talked about in an official capacity on this show. And it's mainly because the fall off is coming after the off season, his last album, which, well, I mean, I'm skipping over Might Delete Later for obvious reasons, but the last
I
true
should
sort of
say, I did accidentally say that all of Might Delete Later was taken off of streaming. That isn't true.
is it?
Seven Minute
Oh,
Drill was taken off the album,
okay.
but the album is still there. You can listen to
Oh,
it.
okay. Well, that's better than taking the whole thing off, I suppose.
Yeah,
But the off season was an album that came out, and the collective response to it was so that we just didn't figure. Like none of us were big into J. Cole. We didn't have any history with him, so we were like, it's better we just kind of leave this untouched. And then we kind of moved on because J. Cole's cachet, J. Cole's sort of currency as an artist. I don't want to say it's diminished, but I definitely feel like it's in a very different place than it was, say, 10 years ago. And I know that, like, it's a decade, of course he is, but for a member of the big three, it's like, and again, I hate having to come back to this framework, but J. Cole kind of insists on coming back to this framework, so I'm gonna have to use the tools at my disposal. And it's very, very odd evaluating where J. Cole is in hip hop because he is simultaneously this commercial giant, platinum no features. That's the meme that you hear over and over again. He's able to do that. He got his early endorsement on in his career from Jay-Z, which basically just, whoosh, skirted him to the upper echelon immediately. And he had albums like 2014 Forest Hill Drive, which with people in our age demographic, that was a huge album. Like as big as the Kendrick albums that came out at the time, that's how big that was. Like it was still pretty inescapable. And now we see J. Cole after teasing a record called The Fall Off for years and just sort of saying like this is my retirement album, this is where I'm going to end it, and being really kind of vague about what the fall off is, what this means. Like you could feel the tension in the air of everybody just being like, what is the fall off? What is this gonna be? What is it gonna do? And then a bit of a wrench was thrown into everything after J. Cole and Drake dropped the song in which we did the response, the fuck the big three, it's not just big me, and then the beef happened. We all know. We were all there. We covered it extensively.
J.
But
Cole pushed the first domino that started all of this.
and you know, I see all sides of how this began because on the one hand, J. Cole's initial bar is very throwaway. It's very like it's him and me, and he's not even saying anything that he necessarily like thinks. He's basically just repeating the consensus that has been yelled at him for years. And so, yeah, I can see why that was just sort of a throwaway lyric. And I also conversely see why Kendrick Lamar probably got his feathers ruffled a little bit about that because it's like, what are you bringing me into this for? First of all, and then him not being on the song, all the drama, but then him bowing in and then immediately bowing out. That was a rough moment for the dude. Like a bunch of his fans and J. Cole fans are as psychotic as
Strange.
Drake and Kendrick fans have been. That is
Just psychotic in a completely different way.
Yeah, there are three specific brands of psychosis that go along with the members of the big three, and that like Kendrick's are theater kid psychos, J. Cole's are like just J. Cole projects this image of like of this kind of like wizened hippie kind of guy, but simultaneously also comes across as like a very strange ideological centrist. I don't mean that in the politically binary term. I mean in the like trying to find middle ground. Like J. Cole, his image has always been about projecting the idea of the relatable dude, the guy who's just like you and is able to voice his thoughts and opinions with a lyrical level that is unparalleled. Because if there's one thing that I will say that preparing for this album gave me an appreciation for, it's that, and I'm going to be 100% honest and lay all of my baggage out here because I cannot, in good conscience, say that I can evaluate this album from like a purely evaluative sense because your feelings on J. Cole are your feelings on this album. They are so linked, it's impossible to separate the two. And with J. Cole, I've never really gotten him. I've never really understood him. I've heard music that I've liked. I've heard albums that I've liked. But his presence in the big three, again, I don't like Drake. I think Drake fucking sucks. I understand why he's in the big three. I understand why he's successful, and I understand why people like him. I understand why people like Cole, but I don't understand why he's as immense as he is. And
J. Cole
preparing for
feels like
this
the rap's living embodiment of the potential man meme.
a little bit, it's
Of
it's
just like, the next album, that's gonna be the one that J. Cole's gonna prove he's 10 out of 10, top three man.
it's
And it
sort of
just never really came.
a
Like,
false promise of sorts,
yeah.
like
Like I remember 2014 Forest Hills Drive, yes, got all the hype in the
mhm.
world. And ironically, my favorite J. Cole album is the one that nobody likes, which is For Your Eyes Only.
I Jen, I was literally about to say the exact same thing.
I would not be here today without For Your Eyes Only because that was one of the first albums where I feel like I was really engaging with a critical conversation around like a new hip hop release. Because like
Yeah,
dudes I went to high school with were talking about that album on Facebook when it dropped.
yeah. And
And
that
so
doesn't feel like real, you know? Like that level of success for someone like J. Cole is so atypical.
And I've always had a soft spot for Your Eyes Only, but I've been going through some of the J. Cole stuff that I missed in the interim. So like I listened to KOD for the first time earlier this week. I didn't like it all that much. I
Eh,
listened to Might Delete Later, and I thought it was mostly pretty bad.
yeah.
And
It's
I thought the off season was just okay, but that's the thing is that on every J. Cole album, I see the potential, but I just never think his energy's being put in the right direction in the moment that he's trying to make it happen. And I honestly feel similarly about this, where like you could have the most momentum that you've had in ages, but you're going to call this your retirement. And I felt frustrated walking into this album with that conceit because when I listened to the Birthday Blizzard mixtape, I thought, this is a guy that still has a lot of passion and can still make a lot of things move. But the thing that I ended up walking away with that's going to make me appreciate the fall off probably more than I actually like it, which is not nothing. It's not
No,
nothing.
no, correct.
But the thing that's going to make me appreciate it is how honest Cole is about not really feeling this as much as he used to, which
Hmm.
is a recurring theme throughout the lyricism and the verses on this album that I just keep coming back to and I keep getting fixated on of like, oh, it must feel really difficult to have to make a rap album where you have to explain why you don't like rapping as much anymore. It feels like what if they actually, beat and pummeled Andre 3000 into making another rap album where he said he wanted to not rap anymore.
Wow,
And then
that's a
he
really good
actually
way
did
of
it.
putting it.
And then he actually did it because that's what the fall off kind of is. And this is an album that we've been promised for, I'm going to call it 8 years because the last track on KOD is called
Yeah.
Intro to the Fall Off, which was a diss at Lil Pump at the time. I mean, not at
Wow.
the time. It's still a diss to Lil Pump. But to go back to listen to that song for the first time in 2026 is crazy. But I did it. It's so funny thinking that like a diss at Lil Pump is more or less the intro to this record because J. Cole is still that guy who's having to reckon the old hip hop that he loves with the new reality of hip hop in the present. And honestly, those are some of the most compelling song conceits on the album. Like
For
on
sure.
what's the one? I Love Her More. Is that what it's
I love
called?
her again,
I Love Her
which
Again. Yeah.
interpolates the Common song I Used to Love Her, which notably is a conceptual song where Common personifies hip hop as a woman and his developing relationship and ultimate alienation with the art and commercial success of hip hop as a woman.
And ultimately, I come down on this record more positive than negative, which I'm very happy to say, right? I wanted to like this album. I wanted to come on
Yes,
and be like,
yes.
yes, this J. Cole album is good and it's
Hmm.
worth your time. And I do genuinely believe that it is. Don't let any of what I'm about to say negatively
That,
drive you away from it because this is worth investigating. It is
yes,
worth checking out,
completely
absolutely,
co-sign.
regardless of your feelings on J. Cole as an artist. But I want to first talk about where I felt the most compelled by this album, and it is on J. Cole revisiting his relationship with the art form
Yeah.
by literalizing and making metaphors out of it, like on I Love Her Again. But it's also in the way that he's telling stories, stories that very clearly rest heavy on his head as he contemplates this retirement.
Yeah.
Specifically, I wanted to talk about the ending of the first disc and the song The Let Out,
Hmm.
which I came down, I mean, similar to Punk Rocky, a song that takes a genre move for the artist, but one that I ended up finding to be a highlight of the project because The Let Out is like a psychedelic rock track about
That's,
getting involved in a shooting at a club that comes right after a more traditional approach to that very same conceit,
mhm.
but it's used as this kind of interlude moment in a very like Pink Floyd heavy concept album kind of way. There's a lot of Pink Floyd influence on this track, The Let
Yeah.
Out, and I really, really, really liked it. Like I really loved it. I like the psych rock influence on this. I think J. Cole's singing has gotten a lot better, and his singing
Much,
is consistently
much.
very good on this record.
Hmm.
And hearing him, like he's a really good storyteller, and hearing him talking about barely being able to get away as shots ring out in this club while talking about, the cycles of violence that lead to things like this happening is a really interesting narrative conceit. And it's highlights like that that ultimately make the fall off really worth listening to and giving your time to. Where I think my problems with this album really start to rise are sadly in the most simple ways that you can have a problem with an album like this is just that it's too long and some of these song conceits are a little bit redundant. And
Yeah.
but when the album is this long and when there's this many cases of it happening, you kind of can't get away from that being a thing that holds you back. And I understand why the album ended up being the shape that it is, because if we're gonna go off the words of KOD, the fall off has basically been in development for 8 years. And so you
Almost a
probably do,
decade.
yeah, you probably do have an attachment to a lot of these songs, but you should probably figure out which one of them fits it better today than it did, yesterday, and maybe trim some of the fat, and you can make this a really more consistent, more concise, more definitive farewell statement than it is. But I'm largely leaning positively on this. So, but I want to see if you have a way that we can get into the particulars a bit more, because I'm kind of speaking in big blanket statements about this so far. Where do you think we can get in on the specifics of this?
I think it's important to at least make clear that in trying to prepare for this and trying to listen to it, I did ultimately come to the conclusion that I do understand why J. Cole is in the big three. I get it now. And that's not to say that I love this album. I really don't. I think it's good. I think it is functional. I don't think that there are a lot of bad songs on the album. I think there are a lot of misguided ones. I think there are a lot of ones that don't necessarily hold up under the biggest amount of scrutiny. And I think that J. Cole's desire to have constant, unique song conceits actually kind of bites him in the ass and does end up like repeating a couple of ideas. But the thing is that listening to him, I understood something because it's difficult to make this delineation in your head. J. Cole is an exceptional rapper. And when I say that he is an exceptional rapper, I mean the in the moment art of it. Like his flows. I'm talking about just his word choice and stuff. He is one of the best. And honestly, this album is a phenomenal showcase of his talent because the flows that he breaks out on here, you can hear, I mean, like he adopts common flows on here. He's doing
Mhm.
Andre 3000 stuff. He's doing Biggie stuff. Like it's
T.I. as well.
like stuff like southern hip hop stuff too, like stuff that I never would have predicted that he would have reached for that I think is just like wow, I definitely undervalued the versatility that you have always had and always commanded. The like and I get it. Like when he talks about loving rap and loving the art of it and when he's saying things the way that he's saying them, I'm like I am the closest I have ever been to understanding J. Cole's stance. I get it on some level. And and I'm gonna admit here that a lot of where I'm coming from on this record has to do with the fact that I have been plying myself with the opinions of other people just so I could come at this from as most of a informed perspective as possible because I feel supremely out of my depth with J. Cole in a way that I don't with most other rappers of this tier. And so when listening to things like, I would really highly recommend going and watching the newest Spectrum Pulse video that is J. Cole and the Myth of Average. It's a great fucking
Mm.
video. Everybody should go and watch that. But like in it, it's basically Mark talking about the paradoxical place in which J. Cole finds himself, in that again, it's kind of what you said, Jen, in that he is a guy who doesn't really seem like he wants to be doing what he's doing anymore. But at the same time, he is saying how much he loves it and how much he respects it. And it makes this feel so strange that J. Cole feels like a guy who's been batting below his own average, but it's because he got put in the wrong fucking league. It's because he was never supposed to be here. He never was supposed, like, the fact that he was positioned into the big three, he didn't do that. He played into it. And that's been my frustration with J. Cole. Because many people have said, like, after Cole sort of bowed out of the beef and he dropped that, like, Port Antonio or whatever that fucking song was,
Yeah, yeah, Port
and
Antonio.
where he kind of like weirdly backpedals and is like, oh, but if I was in the battle, I could have won. And there were some people who were just like, guys, what's he gonna do other than say he's the best? This is what the game is. Like you are disliking the man for doing what everybody's doing. And I get that. But my problem is the fact that J. Cole has never been comfortable in those clothes. He has never once embraced that role, and he's trying to reap the benefits on things like Port Antonio, where it's like he does not project the image of a guy who thinks he is the best of all time. He does not project the image of a guy who thinks that he is going to save hip hop. Like, and that's not a problem. In fact, that's a good thing. That's why I find J. Cole interesting. But because he has been placed where he is, commercially. He is constantly kicking himself back and forth, trying to grapple with the fact that he's here but doesn't want to be. And a lot of that frustration does come out on the fall off. And again, this is an excellent showcase of J. Cole's talent because so many of these songs showcase his performance and he's doing great. Like again, his singing voice is a lot better. And even if it's not super great within the context of one specific song, the production of the record will make it meld a little bit better. But I think the issue here is just that J. Cole, he loves rapping, but I don't really feel like he loves making albums or being an album artist. He loves songs, he loves performance, but I never, like, whenever he makes swings like this, when he does like a double album or when he does a concept on KOD, this is going to be the most conjecture that I have here. So if you want to call bullshit on what I have to say right now, call bullshit because I totally get it. But every interesting choice J. Cole made from a specific period in time feels like he made them out of obligation. It feels like he saw people like Kendrick who were at his level and had his similar level of acclaim and were very lyrical conscious rappers in the same vein. It feels like he saw the kind of things that someone like Kendrick was doing and thought, I need to do these things because I'm here too. And again, I'm not saying that that is a fact or it's reality. I'm saying that's what I think happened because you have albums like KOD, which are going for this sort of hyperlink hip hop album, which really feels like a post T-Pab move. It feels like he is trying to introduce song conceits on this album where you're speaking from the perspective of departed hip hop souls, and that's really hard to view in a vacuum when the biggest rap album of the previous year had an enormous song that did exactly this. Or the album before that, that was a double record that was kind of about unpacking where they were. This is, in fact, J. Cole's hip hop maturation record. But the problem is that that's every J. Cole album. Every one of them attempts to do this. And on these songs, there is many points where he plays with perspective or does something interesting that even if I don't think it wholly works, something about it compels me. On a song like, for instance, I think the first time it shows up on here is Safety, which is a song about sort of portraying Cole in the front half of the one thing I really love about Cole on this album is that there is a lot of effort he puts into unflatteringly portraying himself and doing
Yeah.
it with like no holds barred. That is not an easy thing to do. And I don't feel like that's unintentional. Like I feel like a lot of people who aren't J. Cole fans will probably look at some of these songs and be like, "Oh, he thinks he's so great on this song." And they completely miss the actual conceit of what's happening. Like on Safety, where he is reckoning with somebody and somebody is like coming to him and talking and being like, "Oh, I know you're busy. I know you've got all this stuff going on," like trying to qualify his answers. And for a while you're like, "Ugh, yeah, we get it, Cole, you're busy, whatever the fuck." And then the second half of the song is about someone who was trying to reach out to him but couldn't, and then eventually passed away of AIDS. And I'm sure that there is a lot of more complex and thorny feelings that one can have about something like this, but my gut reaction to this song was, okay, I get it. I see what we're doing here, and I don't feel like this song is a failure. It feels maybe a bit clumsy at the start. It doesn't entirely, you don't entirely know where it's going, but I feel like that is a mission accomplished, for example.
Let me linger on Safety because I have a thought. And I haven't seen anybody bring it up with regard to this
Please.
album, so I'm just gonna run it. There was a verse on the song Pie off of off of Might Delete Later, where J. Cole
Yep.
says some, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, absolutely transphobic shit.
Disgusting, actually. Like, I
And
was really disappointed that he said shit like that, honestly.
the interesting thing about what he said, though, is that it's so vague that I'm unclear why it's even there in the first place. Like, is that a diss at Kendrick because of Auntie Diaries? Like, were you trying to do a thing? Or did you just like get way in over your head with this metaphor that you got? Uh,
I think both, probably.
I really don't know, and that makes it worse, right? The fact that I can't figure it out even after
Yeah.
listening to the song multiple times
Because you should be
is
able to. That's the thing. You should.
if it's a diss at Kendrick, I should be able to sniff it out. This moment on Safety, I ended up really becoming endeared to it after multiple listens to this album because at first I was making that connection and I had a very negative reaction to it of like
I did too.
whether or not he means to, it's attempting to absolve if you're looking at his discography this way. And I'm not saying I spent all my time doing that, but it's building off of a moment in his career and in his lyricism and in his artistry where I think I've just been the most explicitly disappointed in anything J. Cole has ever done was on that
Yeah,
moment off of Might Delete Later.
I agree.
I've never felt more of a stank when thinking about J. Cole than I did
He,
thinking about that song. But the
he,
thing about Safety is that he's doing exactly what you were saying, which is that he's airing out his own dirty laundry in a way that is not attempting to cloy for pity or exonerate himself. It's purely reflective in this
yes.
moment because he's talking about somebody reaching out to him and talking about feeling regret over the way that you treated this person that you grew up with who like moved out of town and came out as queer and started doing this and that and the other that you kind of intentionally like kept your distance from because oh well he's not like us whether you know not that we're homophobic or whatever but like he doesn't run with
He
the
even
gang like
steps back
that
and is like,
anymore.
and we used to call him a, but I realized that's like, and that moment is why I was disappointed with J. Cole because it's like, it's not as though I am out here with the expectation that every fucking rapper needs to be a trans ally. I'm not that fucking deluded, guys. But on the other hand, J. Cole is a guy who kind of prides himself on understanding and being, again, being the everyman and trying to consider perspectives. And that's just something that I expected better from him, that I expected more from him. It's the only time, because like whenever J. Cole contradicts himself, it's usually because he's got these two conflicting ways that he's viewed as the lyrical guy and the commercial guy, and one will conflict with the other. But that's one of the few times where it felt like J. Cole was conflicting with who he actually was and not who he is seen as, which is
I
why
mean,
it
that's what his
stung.
whole participation in the beef, I think, was about. He felt like
Yeah,
he probably felt this very explicit conflict between these two sides of himself, who everybody says he should be and who he thinks he should be.
yes.
And that's not, and I'm not saying he's come back from reckoning with that conflict perfectly, but
No,
safety is a step in the right direction, but not fully there in terms of
yes.
getting over the transphobic stuff on the last record.
I completely agree with you. And it's why it's kind of frustrating how there are some songs on here that really feel like they're either repeating ideas or they're conceits that just don't really add much to the overall experience of the album. Like songs like Who the Fuck Is You, for instance, where it's just kind of like, I mean, I get the in the moment immediacy of this, but this is a song that I just feel like adds absolutely nothing to the overall album experience or what you're trying to say with it. And it
It comes at
feels,
such a strange point in the sequencing because Bunce Road
yeah,
Blues is already like kind of bad. I mean, the individual
yeah,
parts
I
work,
agree.
but none of Cole's verses and the thematic content therein really congeal. Neither do the contributions of Future and Thames. Bunce Road Blues feels like a weird kind of mismatch of all these ideas that just never really coalesce. And then Who the Fuck Is You is like a stop the presses banger, but then you get to the end of the first disc stuff with drum and bass and the let out, which are the two songs about the shooting at the club that he kind of explores in these two different perspectives, which leads into Bombs in the Ville, which is a very formal kind of interlude for the two discs. But Who
Hmm.
the Fuck Is You just kind of comes out of nowhere, and I think the song is pretty good. Like it's got a nice throwback to this more Dirty South
Yeah.
production style that I really, really like. And when those kicking synths come in the second half, I can't stop moving when
Oh,
that stuff
yeah.
starts. Like
Like
it's good, but it's so misplaced in the grand scheme of the album. And it's little complications like that that make this hard to really wholeheartedly get behind.
when Cole is doing weird shit with the production on this album, which he frequently does, like you mentioned that he basically has a full-blown rock song that's like got these really psychedelic undertones. And I agree, like those are like moments when they rear their head, the rock influence on some of these beats is really creative and really interesting. And even on a song like The Let Out, which honestly I don't really like lyrically, I just kind of find the storytelling a bit tedious here, but the sound of it compels me through. Like I actually end up liking the song just because it sounds so cool. The problem is that whenever this album is not explicitly doing something really creative with its production, it sounds exactly the same. It sounds so similar. And that's gonna happen on a double album, probably in the best of moments. But like again, I'm thinking about big hip hop double albums we're thinking about Mr. Morale, thinking about Speaker Box and The Love Below. Those are albums that are incredibly versatile. They don't pick one lane. They're kind of messes. And this is too, but it feels way more like a mess of lyrics really than a mess of musicality. It's a very different place. And it's why at the end of the day, like the thing I most heard in like just from people talking about this album is this album is a J. Cole album. You are going to feel about it the way you feel about J. Cole. And I wanted to have so much more of an interesting opinion than that. I was like, I don't even really know what that means. You're not telling me anything. And then I listened to the album and I was like, fuck, they're right. Because it's true. This is the equivalent of, this is like when Kanye's Yeezus is a very similar record in that way, in that that is an album that is a barometer for the artist and less an album in its own right. It is how compelling do you find this guy doing this really specific thing? And this is what that is. And at the end of the day, I think the delineation I can make here is this. I think J. Cole is a phenomenal rapper. I think he is an incredible lyricist. And I think he is a deeply mediocre songwriter. And some people are going to listen to what I just said and have no fucking idea what I'm talking about because they think that I just said the same thing 3 times. Here's the difference. Songwriters, I'm talking about big picture. Lyricism is the art of constructing a singular lyric within a song. Rapping is the actual art of using the words and using the flows to make what you're saying musical. Songwriting is like the big picture structural stuff, the thematic meat and potatoes. Whenever Cole tries to shoot beyond his grasp, which is pretty often, which is very frustrating for people like us because we love when people try. Even if they fail, we love when they try. And Cole tries a lot, and that's the thing. The thing that I find the most frustrating about J. Cole is that on paper, I should fucking love this dude. There is no, like, the fact that some of his bars are fucking cringy is also, like, you could just kind of flip that on its head and say, like, well, he's being emotionally honest with himself, despite the fact that he's being cringy. He is being very sincere. He's a really sincere dude. I love sincerity. He is very technically gifted, and I respect people who showcase that technical flashiness. And the humility is also quite refreshing. I have never once believed J. Cole, if he ever on a record is like, oh, I'm the greatest of all time, I have never believed him. Never once. Because I don't believe that he believes that. Because when somebody like Kendrick or somebody like Drake says it, it's not about being right. It's not about whatever. It's about being convincing. It's not about whether or not Kendrick is actually number one. It's about, do you think that they believe it? The frustrating thing about J. Cole is that I've never really been sure what he believes. It's very difficult to actually tell because of the way he writes songs. He kind of folds in on himself a lot. And again, this guy, this unrepentant honesty and this stuff that he's got, that's like a magnet to me. I love that kind of stuff, but it really feels like he's an artist who just tragically never embraced his strengths because of the industry. And that is partially what this album is about, and I feel it. But there's a part of me who comes away from this album and I'm like, do you think J. Cole is relieved that it's over? Because, like, regardless of whether or
Ah.
not this is actually the end, the feeling that I get from this is like, now I can have peace. You
I
know?
mean, I think the last five songs on this album, looking at those as a holistic picture, start to maybe answer that question. Because you have I Love Her Again and What If, which
Mhm.
are this kind of double feature of Cole conceptualizing his relationship with hip hop as a medium. First on I Love Her Again, talking about hip hop as a woman that he is in love with and then is very judgmental towards and then is humbled by and reaffirms his love for her,
That's a
right?
good song. I
Yeah.
like that journey he goes on. It's a really good sequel song. It's good.
And then there's What If, which is not as good, but it's
No,
him
no.
speaking as Tupac and Biggie essentially entering a dialogue with each other about like, what if we had just had like one more conversation that kept things from going the way they did. And that's all well and good, and I appreciate Cole's like attempts, but the thing is, we already have a song that does this by a guy who is actually there for all this, and it's Death Row East off of King's Disease 2. Nas already
Yes.
did this because he was there when it happened and he had things to say that he kept secret for decades. And so it's very funny to see J. Cole try to do his version of that, but all he can really do is go, man, that's crazy.
See, and
Wouldn't that be wild?
here's the thing about this.
Whereas Nas is like, here's how we were this close
And
to like squashing the beef before shit went bad. And that's a genuinely compelling. And I felt like I was hearing history being revealed to me on Death Row East. This is just a nice concept for a song. That is okay.
that's the difference between that's like if you want me to illustrate the point that I'm making, that's what makes Nas an excellent songwriter and what makes Cole kind of a lackluster one is that they approach this concept and one of them has stakes. One of them you are involved in. It has immediacy. And the other you can only appreciate in the abstract, really. And that's only if you get along with like what the actual mechanics of what these two people in this song are saying with two people. And again, trying to do the whole like voice of the legends that came before you. Again, it's this thing that like now every member of the big three has done that in like the past 3 years. And the thing is with this song that frustrates me is that I feel like this is J. Cole trying to sort of work through. Okay, basically what I'm saying here is that I think that J. Cole sees Biggie and Pac as him and Kendrick because it's the same dynamic. And this is him. Yeah,
Ah,
you see what I'm saying here? And the
ah.
thing is, here's what you do with this song. Just make it to Kendrick. Like literally, just do that. Don't eschew the concept, eschew what this could mean in a greater sense and trying to do this historical revisionism. Just say what you mean. Attack the point. Because I see this song, I read between the lines, and I'm like, you are so clearly trying to use this as a proxy to figure out your own shit and why it was so confusing because the whole like, oh, why didn't we just do this? It kind of feels like if you turn back time a little bit, you could also say that he would have been like, why did it have to end up like this? Like, why did I end up inserting myself here? Like, why did we have to have this whole crash out? Why did you and Drake have to fight? Just talk about it. And I know that there is probably a pull that somebody like Cole would feel away from that because of just sensationalism and trying to, dig up the past at this point. Because again, we're long divorced from the beef now, and bringing up old shit, it's weird sometimes. But that's the thing. J. Cole shouldn't be concerned with that kind of shit because he should just be honest. He should just be himself. And it feels like this album is the closest I have gotten to getting a real glimpse at the man, like actually understanding what he likes and what he values, divorced from everything, because the conceit of this being the retirement album is kind of a way for him to just sort of be like, all bets are off now. I don't have to contend with anything other than myself. And it feels like he's still fighting those inclinations. It feels like he's still really pushing back against how he has been pigeonholed. But I still see more of him than I ever have before. And that feels valuable to me. There is, again, a lot of skillful production and rapping on this album. I don't really think it comes together in a huge, meaningful way. And in that respect, it's kind of a perfect microcosm for J. Cole as a whole. It's something that it doesn't really all make sense, but you appreciate it in the abstract because everything it represents is good. It's healthy. I think that hip hop is better for having J. Cole in it. It's just that I feel like hip hop could be so much better if it didn't make J. Cole kind of a monster of his own making in this way. Like, I want to see the alternate timeline where J. Cole is not in the big three, and when J. Cole is a rapper on the level of Run the Jewels, or when J. Cole is a rapper on the level of Freddie Gibbs, where he has enough commercial pull to get people talking about him, but he also has the freedom to just do himself, to not feel like these expectations have hold of him. Because if you want to argue that J. Cole is not fighting those expectations, I'm gonna need you to rewind to 2 years ago real hard and take a look at what happened because it clearly matters.
And I
Hey,
think, you know what I've been thinking about this week while listening to this album? You know who I've been thinking about?
who?
Logic. Because do you want to
Interesting.
know what happened as soon as Logic announced that he was retiring and put out his big retirement album that everybody liked?
He made another album?
He just kept fucking making music and people kind of liked that too.
It's it fucking made me think of
The stakes felt lower because it didn't feel like he was walking anything back. It just felt like Logic was kind of casually changing his mind and getting back into it and letting the expectations of the industry and the fans be the thing that he retired from. Not rapping, but being a major player. That
God,
was
I
the
would
thing that
love
Logic
for that
quit
to be the
doing.
case here. I would
That was the
love for this to happen.
Yeah, that was the part of it that Logic abandoned. And I think what's happening here is what's happened to Logic, which is that maybe Cole just wants to walk away from the limelight, but maybe there's still some hope in there for like being able to enjoy rapping and putting out music again. I'm not saying we're owed any of that, but it
No,
would be
God, no.
interesting. But it would be interesting to see, and honestly, it would probably give me more of a soft spot for this album than I already kind of have.
It's
Because I'm already feeling a very nice soft spot for this developing
yeah.
in my head.
If this album serves to be a kind of sacrificial lamb to be like, hey guys, the old J. Cole is gone, and now if he, because again, it's like, I just don't believe that somebody like Cole is gonna stop making music. It feels wrong just because I've been listening to the man talk about how much he loves rapping for more than a decade now. And I'm like, again, even though I'm not a J. Cole fan, it's just like, dude, I don't want you to go if you don't feel if you still want to make more shit. Like I feel that way about any artist. If you have to retire for an arbitrary reason, that's an enormous tragedy. Think about if fucking Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese had retired like 15 years ago. Think of the fucking movies we wouldn't have right now. That's so awful. And yet, I would love because I mean, what happened to Logic afterwards too is that his albums got a lot better too. He became like way more of an interesting artist, even though not as many people were paying attention to him. And sure, I probably am still not going to like the new Logic albums. I'm probably not going to be over the moon if J. Cole ever drops anything again. But I would love it if this was just an excuse to put yourself in the place that you finally want to be because it feels like this album feels weirdly divorced from like Dreamville. Like I was talking about the
I
expectations I
was
had for an
waiting
album,
for Dreamville people to show up on this, and
right?
I'm still seriously thinking like, what the hell happened there?
I was gonna say, like, is this have to do with like label drama? Because we know that Dreamville people have been very vocal about the fact that the label's not been great to them or anything. And so part of me is like, I don't know. That like I feel like maybe he might take more of a back seat and be more of like an industry presence and just focus on running Dreamville and hopefully maybe getting their fucking shit together finally. But I guess at the same time, I really it's very rare that an artist of that level just kind of gets to decide what they're going to do next. And as long as it's on your own terms and it isn't just this arbitrary thing, like it made me think of fucking Quentin Tarantino being like, oh, I'm only going to make 10 movies, even though I've already fucking made 10 movies if you want to be technical about things. And I'm like, what? Why are you being so precious about the number of things you're making? You clearly love making movies. So what the fuck is this fucking arbitrary limit that you're placing on yourself? Like, don't adhere to that for based on what? Like, I don't feel like you want to
Nobody
stop.
told you you had to do that.
Yeah, I was just like, it doesn't even feel like you want to stop. So I don't get what this is supposed to be. But with this, it feels like J. Cole has finally figured out a way to take control of the narrative because that's what this has been from the start. Him trying to be like, this is the fall off, which naming it the fall off is already kind of taking control of the narrative because you have already deflected any like narrative pushback of just like, oh, well, he fell off. And it's like, yeah, he told you. So it's like there's a built-in mechanism there, but it is also like he's just finally in a place where I'm ending it here because I said so. And so it's like, okay, now I understand this as a development. So I mean, partially, like, I like this album. I think it's broadly good. I think it's thoughtful. I think it's interesting. But I would love to look back on it in the rear view even more fondly if he drops stuff later. Because if he continues, frankly, that's how he proves that he was worthy of the respect that I do have for him because I do respect J. Cole.
Oof.
I mean, there is a lot of stuff that I feel like again, the world is so much better off with more J. Cole's than more Drake's. And there is like if you have ever taken anything I've said seriously, that's the statement you need to take seriously. The world needs many more J. Cole's than it needs Drake's. Like I will take this messy 6 out of 10 more than an empty 2 out of 10 every single time you give me the option. And if you don't,
Same,
I'm dead.
same. And I want to say one last thing. J. Cole kind of tells his origin story on the
Yes.
song, and the whole world is the Ville, one of the last tracks on this.
Hmm.
And to connect it to the Dreamville thing, I really do wonder, was he set up to fail from the beginning by being so eagerly adopted by a guy as big as Jay-Z at the time?
I think so, honestly. I do. Yeah.
Ugh,
That sucks. It sucks that
it
such a like
does.
imagine getting an endorsement from the guy. I mean like not a guy. I mean the guy. And then you have to contend with the fact that that's the worst thing that happened to you. Ah, it fucking blows. Imagine that. Imagine if I got a fucking cosign from Stephen King. Like, well, the pressure of that would fucking kill me. Like, I don't want that. Like, let me stay here. I don't want that smoke, dude.
But
Ah!
the disappointing thing about all of J. Cole's music, frankly, is that he's never had the ability or even displayed a hint of the willingness to interrogate that notion. He's
Yeah,
just always felt like he's struggling to figure out where his role is without ever trying to figure out
what got
why
him there?
he's struggling in the first place. And I feel like this album is a step in the right direction for that.
It
But
sucks
if
that we're
this is
both
it,
saying that
then
about the end. Like, oh, it's a
yeah,
step in the
if
right
this is
direction.
it,
Like,
then what do we do with that? And I guess we have to figure that out ourselves.
it's true.
Which, you know, I agree with you on a lot of what we've said about J. Cole, which is that
Ditto.
like the world needs more J. Cole's mistakes and disappointments included.
I wish that if there's one thing I can say that's not like a backhanded compliment to J. Cole, which I unfortunately feel like I've done nothing but backhandedly compliment the guy, it's that he is so honest about his flaws that I feel like, again, everybody could learn from that because like I just you don't see people holding themselves accountable in the way that he does.
Sitting on the stage at your own festival that you started with your company and telling the audience that you a couple of weeks ago just made the biggest artistic mistake of your entire career
I
is,
fucked up and I think the guy I fucked up on is better than me, is what he said to a legion of people who came to see him.
and that's undeniably, I say this without a hint of irony and without a hint of backhandedness, like one of the most respectable
Yes.
moves I've ever seen.
Hmm.
So I know that that person is there, and I have a lot of respect for Cole. That doesn't mean that there aren't frills and complications to loving Cole.
Oh, for sure. If anything, I felt an immense amount of closure because I have been trying to find where I land on J. Cole for like a decade now. I've never figured out how I felt about the guy. And now that I get the closest I think I've ever been to him, I'm like, okay, I feel like I can close the book on this and just be like, I have my thoughts sorted out on the dude. And that's kind of what I feel like this album does. If I can give it like a wholehearted recommendation for something, is that by the end of this record, I feel like you will know exactly how you feel about this artist with a level of clarity that you are not often afforded. Like if again, the album that I'm comparing this a lot to is Mr. Morale, and if you want to simplify my comparison here to just being like J. Cole, you think J. Cole is copying Kendrick? Like, no, I think there's a lot of variables at play here, but what you're missing the point in that when I walked away from Mr. Morale, I felt as though I understood a lot of things about Kendrick's thought process, but I didn't get a closer look at him. I got a look at his problems, and I got a look at him honestly bearing those problems. But Kendrick Lamar, the person, like you watch him in interviews, and it's like this soft-spoken, funny little dude is the guy who's making all these, scary ass songs that has gotten everybody hightailing it out of the industry. But with Cole, it's like I would love to have a conversation with J. Cole. I don't know if I would want to have a conversation with Kendrick or Drake as much as I would him. Just in the purely abstract, like I would want to know what this guy has to
Dinner
say
with
about everything.
Jay-Z or dinner with
It's
J. Cole
it's
or
totally that. It's totally that. There, and again, it's really hard for me to hate the like even really cringe J. Cole fans because it's like they're people who are getting on Genius and putting in work. They're guys who care about lyrics, and I can only hate that so much because caring about this kind of stuff, it's kind of in short supply these days. So I feel like, batting them down, just like don't kick them while
I don't
somebody's
mean to
already
bat
down.
anybody down. Like I agree that I've probably thrown a handful of backhanded compliments but that goes entirely to the music.
Well, that's the
That does
thing.
not go to my thoughts on J. Cole as an
It's
individual, and
it's the
none
fact
of our
that you
fucking reviews even do. So I don't even know why I'm trying to dig
it's the
that
fact that
hole
you
for myself.
can backhandedly compliment J. Cole. Like, I can't backhandedly compliment Kendrick Lamar. Like, it's not because I'm, so enamored with the dude that I can't criticize him. He's done some objectionable shit in the past. But at the same time, I wouldn't be like,
There's no
yeah,
room for a backhanded compliment. It's just, hey, that was a miss.
yeah, it's either like, yeah, you did it, or it's not as thorny. It's not as complicated. So this is something that at the end of the day, I do give more or less an enthusiastic thumbs up to, just because this
Yeah,
this is a
absolutely.
moment. This is a moment. You should tune into it.
Yes, absolutely recommend the album. I like the album. That's what
Yeah,
I've
me
come down
too.
on.
It's a good album. I think that it has much more good than bad in it. So, wow, hmm, that was satisfying. So, everyone, tune in next week where we have some new reviews for some new records with you. We're also going to be doing a round of news. We're going to be doing a Grammy roundup and everything. And tune in to the next episode of Jen and Jake's Bizarre Fray as well. We're going to be doing all kinds of stuff in the near future. So please have a nice day. And everyone, like always, rock over London, rock on Chicago. Goldfish, the snack that smiles back.